today. What we thought we'd do, firstly though, is just have a bit of a summary first of the soul and how it splits and how it incarnates, so that we just remember the basics about the soul and soul attractions. Because actually sexual attraction is a part of the soulmate relationship, and therefore we need to understand, why sexual attraction actually exists as well, both in a pure state and in an error-based state as well. Okay, shall we stay on either side of the ball?
Yep.
Is that okay? Okay. So we've discussed with you how God, who has masculine and feminine qualities, created all of these little tiny beings called souls, both of which have masculine and feminine qualities. And depending on there's a wide variety of masculine and feminine qualities in the soul. Some of the souls are dominantly masculine as an entire soul, and some are dominantly feminine, and they split. Every soul splits into two in the process of individualization. So we have one half. If we choose a heterosexual, I'll draw it the other way around. If we choose a heterosexual soul, we have one half and the other half. They split. And when we say split, one half always leaves the split first, and then they come into a body. So let's say it was the male who did that, then the male is attracted to two bodies that are created for it. There's a spirit body that's created for it and a physical body that's created for it at the time of conception. And the soul then envelops those bodies and remains connected to those bodies for its entire lifetime while it's developing on Earth, and then it releases the physical body, and then there's a period of time all the way through the spirit world up until the soul union condition, which we'll talk about in a second, that where it can release its spirit body. So the souls then join back together. And in fact, these bodies are a necessary part of the half of the soul while the soul hasn't joined with its other half. In other words, the soul senses, which are all these feelings that are absorbed from the universe, even the sense of sight, taste, touch, and all of those other types of senses. So we're talking not just emotional senses, but feeling-based senses. All of them need the soul, are all funneled, if you like, through a cord into the soul. So there's the cord that joins the physical and spirit body, and people call that the silver cord. And let's call this cord that joins the spirit body with the soul, let's call that a golden cord. And through these cords, all of the sensory apparatus of the physical body are a way that the soul then experiences its environment while it's half of a soul. Now, of course, the same applies to the female when she incarnates. She's attracted to a female body in this case, two of them, spirit body, physical body. Now, we've chosen a soul which has here, in terms of its separation, a soul which has two halves that are relatively equal in its masculine and feminine traits. But if there was a soul that was dominantly masculine and only had a little bit of feminine traits, then they would be attracted to two male bodies. And if there was a soul that was dominantly feminine with very little masculine traits as a complete unit, then when it splits, it would be attracting two female bodies. So that's the general process of the incarnation process. Is there any questions about that before we proceed further? If we wait for the microphone.
AJ, where is the soul before it incarnates? And what does it do?
It's in a soul union state. The only time you actually get to see the soul with your soul eyes, if you like, is when you are in a soul union state. So the first time we saw a soul in this union, in this state before it incarnates, was when we were in a soul union state ourselves.
Because at this time, the soul doesn't actually do anything. It's not aware of itself. It's this process of incarnation and into the physical and spirit bodies, or gaining this physical and spirit bodies that that help the soul begin this process of individuation and understanding that I am a soul. Before this time, there's no awareness that we exist in this place.
May I ask another question? Does it mean as well that the soul in this unconscious condition is not even aware of God?
That's correct. It's not aware of God in a conscious state. So in other words, it does have a connection with God, but it is not aware of that connection because it's in an unconscious state yet. It's yet to actually have a sense of itself, and so therefore it's yet to have a sense of its universe, the universe in which it lives. So if you're not conscious of yourself, how can you then be conscious of anything else? And this is the whole process of individualization, which is what this is all creating, is the process of becoming aware of yourself, and then, of course, the process of becoming aware of everything else around you as well.
Including God.
Including God.
Yeah.
You can keep going with the questions,
May I-
that's fine.
Yes, please. God created the souls, is
Yes.
it right?
Yes.
Yes.
So what purpose did he have, if there was any, to make one soul more dominantly masculine or more dominantly feminine, or did this happen by chance, accidentally?
Well, no, everything that God creates has a huge variety in it. If you look at, so if you liken it to the creation of trees, you imagine for a moment that every single tree that was created happened to be an apple tree, and there was no other trees. So we would never have any other variety of fruit. We would never have any other variety of joy from all these different trees and what they look like. And we would actually be very stuck in a very plain sort of a world, wouldn't we? So everything that God does has a huge amount of variety. And in fact, universally, almost an infinite amount of variety. And it's the same with the soul itself. The whole complete soul has an infinite, almost infinite variety of potentialities as to whether it be dominantly masculine and dominantly feminine and anywhere in between. So the reason why God does this is for our enjoyment, so that we have more variety and therefore a wider joy of experience. So it's actually a gift of love that God creates everything with very, very wide variety and not all the same. So you imagine if we were all the same, then basically there would never be any homosexuality on the planet, which would already create a lack of variety amongst our experiences here on the planet. So the key is that God is always giving this gift of almost infinite variety to us to experience.
Because each soul, even in the when they're split into a male form and a female form, they each have their unique personality. Yeah. So it's like a spectrum of personality and attributes, if you like.
Of which the sexual attribute is one.
Is one. And that's something worth pointing out, that this sexual attraction, this sexuality part of us is a unique, it's an attribute of every soul. And that's why we talk about it under the term the human soul, and specifically in relation to soulmates, because sexuality was created as part of the soulmate relationship of the soul. Yeah.
I do understand this. Maybe one last question.
Far away.
The soul, when it is incarnating, is completely happy with its own condition, or does not?
Yes.
Because sometimes
when you say completely happy, it's not even aware of its own condition just before incarnation, because remember, it doesn't have any self-awareness yet. It gains self-awareness through the process of incarnation. The soul, though, is in a pristine condition without awareness. So in other words, it doesn't have emotional injuries like the rest, that we gain during the process of incarnation. And to be honest, we only gain those emotional injuries because of the emotional injuries of the environment in which we're incarnating. If the environment was free of emotional injuries, then the soul would go through this beautiful process of becoming self-aware without having to also go through absorbing lots and lots of emotional injuries.
Yeah, this was going to be my question, because sometimes, for example, if you are bipolar or if you are just homosexual, they meet a lot of prejudices, a lot of judgment, and then it might not be a very happy situation anymore. So that's why my question.
Well, it's only not all unhappiness on the earth is created by our emotional injuries. It's not created by love. So God creates all these beautiful things from a state of love, creates all this beautiful variety from a state of love, and it's only the environment in which the soul is incarnating that causes it to actually to attract, or usually through the parents' emotions again, attract judgmental conditions. So you're right, many homosexuals and lesbians in the past have attracted much judgment. And a lot of that is to confront us. We need to be confronted in our concepts of what God's variety of creation is. And unfortunately, for the majority of people on the planet, we're very resistive to confronting our belief systems. And God is creating variety constantly in order to confront our belief systems, actually, to help us confront the systems of belief that we have. And part of the confrontation of that is the fact that there are some souls that are homosexual and some souls that are lesbian in nature, in the sense, from God's perspective, it's not really a homosexual or lesbian either. It's not really a label like that, which we'll discuss in a minute. We'll talk about the soulmate, the pure soulmate attraction in a minute. But the reality is, when it does attract the bodies, it does attract two female or two male bodies, and therefore we view it here on earth as a homosexual or lesbian relationship. But the reality is, every relationship God created is actually a soulmate relationship. So in other words, God doesn't differentiate between a homosexual soulmate relationship, a lesbian soulmate relationship, or a heterosexual soulmate relationship. To God, they are all just one thing, and that is a soulmate relationship. That's all. The two halves of the soul slowly joining together. So there's no, in the spirit world in particular, there's no labels like that.
So, there's no preference. In our pure state, it's not that I prefer men or I'm attracted to men. In my pure state, I'm attracted to my soulmate.
Who happens to be male.
It is a male, but I could be what the world would label homosexual, but in my pure state, I would just only have an attraction to my soulmate who happens to be female. Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah. And we want to talk more about that as an introduction, going through this process of what sexual attraction is all about. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? If we come the mic down here and then...
It's just a question, or just a clarification on going back to the pristine soul.
Yes.
I'm a bit confused as to whether the pristine soul is in a 6th sphere state or a 22nd sphere state.
Well, you would say that it's in a 6th sphere state, but it's in terms of the first time you can actually view it, you have to be in a 22nd sphere condition to see it.
The distinction,
because the only way to see the soul is in that unified state.
But I understand you're saying because they're in a unified state. Yeah. The differential is, well, there's many, but in the 6th sphere state, we're perfected in natural love.
Yes.
So the love that God has placed in us, the capacity for love that God has placed in us for other people. In the 22nd sphere state, we have recognised, we've fully individuated ourselves. We've recognised God, we've longed to God for love, and we've received that personally. And we've also dealt with all of the injuries that were created through our incarnation that blocked us to our soulmate, and we've reached union in a conscious way.
Yeah, so you're totally aware.
Yes, you're not aware even...
These are not conscious of their own union.
So they're not conscious of themselves, they're not conscious that I'm half of a soul. As we're all finding out, this is things we discover after incarnation. And the only similarity is that they are unified, but that's just because God creates all of us in this unified state. Yeah.
So you could say that is the real self, the complete. So the two halves unified is the complete self. Not so at the moment you are just one half of your complete self, but you are one half of your complete self that is slowly gaining awareness. And one of the awarenesses you're gaining is this awareness that there is the other half out there of yourself somewhere, right? And that's one of the awarenesses through this process of individualization. That's one of the awarenesses that we eventually gain, that we actually have the other half of us somewhere. Yep. Okay. Now, for many people who are on the earth, they don't have that awareness, and this is one of the things we want to talk about with sexual attraction. But secondly, most spirits don't have that awareness until they reach the 5th sphere or the fifth dimension in the spirit world. That's when they begin gaining a much greater awareness that there is the other half of themselves. Does that make sense? So that's generally what happens. Now on Earth we can gain that awareness at a very, very early stage if we desire to, but the problem is historically is the awareness hasn't been present, and so the majority of us don't really understand what's going on with regard to soulmate attraction. Yep. Yep. If we put the mic straight back behind you, that's it.
And Nico as well had a question
And
at
Nico's
the
got
back when
one
you're
back.
done, Anna.
Okay. If, as I have understood it, when your soul is in union on the soul plane, if I can use that word, even if you have reincarnated and now is in spirit and physical body, is that the same with us?
No, there is a difference between a person who's reincarnated and a person who is in their first incarnation. In a reincarnated condition, there is an attenuation between the connection of the soul and the bodies, the new bodies that have been created. Whereas in the original incarnation, so in my and Mary's first incarnation, which was 2,000 years ago, for us what happened is the same as yourself, and that is that in that condition you are completely connected to your bodies. So when you're first at that moment of conception, when the two bodies are created, your soul is completely enveloping those two bodies, and the soul's power is what maintains the bodies and keeps them alive, actually. That's what keeps the bodies continuing to stay alive. And so for the first incarnation, you don't have an attenuated connection between your soul and your bodies. For myself and Mary, it's very different. It's the same kind of thing in terms of dealing with emotions, because we still have to deal with emotions. But for us, we're dealing with emotions for a different reason than you are. The reason why you're dealing with emotions is because there are injuries inside of you that have been absorbed right from the moment of conception that prevent your soul from growing, and therefore prevent your soul from growing in love, and prevent your soul from conceptualizing love and conceptualizing truth. And so it's a process of learning for the first time. For the reincarnated soul, it's a little different. The process is when you incarnate, basically what you're doing is your 22nd dimension union soul is now overcloaking 4 bodies, two more spirit bodies and 2 more physical bodies, and the connection of these bodies to this soul initially has to begin in a very, very slight way. So in other words, it has to be a very, very minute connection, because the reality is a soul in that condition would kill these bodies due to the imperfection in the bodies that were created through the conception and the absorption of emotions from its parents. And so for us, what we've got to do is we go through a process of remembering our soul, and therefore allowing the memories of that soul to flow into us, into the mind of this spirit body in particular. And then along with that, the way that happens is by letting the emotions of each memory be triggered. Does that make sense? And so while we still have to do emotional processing in the same manner that you do, the emotions are going to be far more intense than what you do to clear emotion. And on top of that, they are slowly connecting a bigger pipe, if you like, towards the soul, until eventually the soul will have complete control of these 2 new bodies. So we had to start off with very, very little control over those 2 bodies, because it would damage, firstly, the parent who was carrying the child, and once the child was born, it would damage the child if the soul attempted a complete connection. And we have to re-establish that connection through a process. Now, nobody knew the process before we did it, so we had to guess about the process, and what we've had to do is find our way through that process, which is very, very different than doing it the first time, in the sense that other people can tell you this is the process because we've been through it. Does that make sense? But when you're going through the second time, particularly if you're the first people going through it, nobody can actually tell you what to do. It's like you're discovering a whole new thing for the very first time. And so you could say that from our perspective, we're going through an experiment. So what you see myself and Mary going through is an experiment. Whereas what you need to go through, you don't need to experiment with that much, because you can have other people tell you, because they have actually been through exactly the same process, if that makes sense. Yep. So the reality is this, like Mary has drawn, this unified soul is now connected to those bodies, right? But the conduit is very, very weak until this mind in this, not the brain of the physical body, but the mind of the spirit body, until this mind of the spirit body is able to even conceive that it has this connection and is able to allow the memories of this connection to flow to it, which are all emotional, then until then it's going to be totally unaware that it is reincarnated at any point. It's only through this process that it will become aware. Does that make sense? So that's why all of the people who have returned at this point have a period of their life where they're totally unaware, and the reason for that is because we're incarnating into a first sphere condition on the planet, and so therefore there's a lot of denial of the emotions and memories of the soul, and so it's totally unaware, and then slowly it's got to gain awareness, but that is a choice. You have to make that choice individually. Like, I can't make the choice for Mary, Mary can't make the choice for me. So it's impossible for me to go up to somebody and say to Jane, "Oh, Jane, you're one of the 14," and for it to actually have any effect on Jane. Because the reality is that unless Jane has the memories, and unless she has the emotions, unless she has the physical experience and allows this emotional experience, so as she's dealing with emotion, unless these memories come to her, and unless she has the physical experiences that are identical to what the 14 have, then you can tell a person they're one of the 14, but it makes no difference. Like, at the end of the day, they're going to have to go through an experience to find it out for themselves. Yeah. So there is a big difference, if you like, between the two parts. So for the majority of people on the planet, we're in our first incarnation, and for the majority of people in the spirit world, they're in their first incarnation. So everything that we're discussing really is primarily based around what happens in the first incarnation with regard to sexual attraction in particular. Yeah. And very similar principles also exist with regard to sexual attraction to a reincarnated soul, in the sense that it's still the emotions that are in each half of the soul that dictate a level of sexual attraction. And we'll talk about that as we go through the discussion
from our
today.
own experience. Yeah.
Yep. Does that make sense? Any other questions you have about that? No? Nico was next, I think.
Hello. I would like to ask a question regarding a vision I had. I have the feeling that it is my memory, let's say, but it contradicts what you have said about it.
Yep.
At some point, I remember everything was dark, and I felt the only way to describe it is like it's during the summer that you sleep outside, and then the small bedsheet leaves your side vulnerable, and a breeze flows you, and you are a little bit, let's say, cold. And it was at that moment I opened my eyes and I saw the earth from above because I was hovering, and then I just closed them again because I didn't know at that time what the whole thing was. But I don't understand how I can remember this, because I felt that it was before I incarnated.
Yes, a lot of people feel that they have memories before they incarnated of the incarnation process. And what that is spirits in the spirit world telling you what actually occurred during your own incarnation. So there is a lot of spirits in the spirit world who want to tell people on earth the truth about their own incarnation. And so what they do is they give you a series of pictures and feelings about what the soul felt during the process of the first incarnation. The first incarnation is not traumatic, with the exception of when it physically attaches to the physical and spiritual bodies. Before that point, it is not traumatic at all. So in other words, there is no trauma in the soul from the incarnation process. In the second incarnation, there is a lot of trauma in the soul through the incarnation process because the soul is going through an experience of contradiction between a love and truth state and no love and truth, and it is totally self-aware that that is occurring. And so the second incarnation, so Mary's second incarnation felt very much different to the first incarnation. The first incarnation we were not conscious of at all, and we investigated it through in the spirit world once we passed. Well, for myself, I knew that as I was on earth in the first century, but you can investigate it once you pass as to what the process was, only by observing other people go through the process. And so what happens is many spirits observe other people going through the process. They can't see the soul because they're not yet using their soul senses to see. They're still using their spirit body to see. So they can't see the soul, but they can see the effect it has on the energization of the two bodies that have been created, and they can feel where the soul's going, where it's coming from, and where it's going through the traces of the energy that the soul emits. And so they can see the effects of the soul, not the soul itself, and they see it. Actually, they see the process of incarnation through the energy fields that the soul actually emits, connecting to the two bodies. And then they can show you a picture of that. If you're a mediumistic person, they can show you a picture of that, and many people on the earth have been shown very complete pictures of that entire process. Many people on earth have then interpreted that as if it was their own acknowledgement of their own process. And what I'm suggesting to you is that's not the case. It's just a picture given to you from a spirit of what they have observed in this process in order to demonstrate to people on earth the truth about the incarnation process. So I don't feel that your experience is contradictory to what's being said. Okay. It's just a spirit giving you that information.
It makes sense because I didn't feel that it was a lie. I felt happy afterwards for some reason.
Yep.
So I didn't have fear. You know, sometimes you have doubt inside you because you know the truth.
Yeah.
But in this case, it was, this is it.
Yeah. The second incarnation and the first incarnations are very different to each other, but we want to get back to the sexual attraction part of it because we can discuss how the nuts and bolts of how it all happens as a separate issue. But if we can get back to the sexual attraction of it, that'd be good, because in the end, the sexual attraction is very, very similar, no matter whether you're you're coming from a reincarnation or you're coming from an incarnation. But like I said, the majority of people on the planet are coming from an incarnation, and so therefore we'll discuss everything from that point of view, if you like. Yeah. Is there any other questions about